Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This Shabbos is the first Shabbos after we received the Torah this past week with the holiday of Shavuot. We begin the summer months, and it's customary in the summer months when the sun gets stronger and we may start letting our guard down a little bit more. We begin with adding more Torah into our lives, and so it's customary that we add in ethics of our fathers every single week, and to enhance our Torah life throughout the summer months. Ethics of our fathers begins with an interesting preface, and that is Moshe Kibel Torah Mesinai Umesara Lo Shua Ve'Shua L'Skenim. Moses received the Torah from Sinai and handed it over to Joshua, who received it, who handed it over to the elders and to the great congregation of Israel. And it's interesting that this specific tractate of Mishnah begins with Moshe Kibel Torah Mesinai, that Moses received the Torah from Sinai, whereas the other tractates of Mishnah doesn't have any preface of any sort. And in fact, the tractate of Mishnah begins actually with the tractate of Brachot, which deals with Shema, which deals with Tefillin, which deals with other aspects of our spiritual lives. We have the Mishnah of Shabbat, and that doesn't mention anything about Moses receiving the Torah from Sinai, whereas ethics of our fathers, which deals with primarily how to deal with this world, how to live a better life. How to live an ethical life. That's where we have Moses receiving the Torah from Sinai. It should be just the opposite. When we have our mitzvah, which are connected with Hashem, with God, we would think like Tefillin or Shabbat. That's where we talk about Moses receiving the Torah from Sinai. But ethics we can learn from every individual, from every great and smart professor and brilliant scholar. And the Rabbi gives a very unique answer and very practical answer, and that is that the reality is that Shabbat we know came from Sinai, Tefillin we know came from Sinai, whereas ethics we think that there's brilliant people out there and we can follow as long as what they say has to be. And this is what Rabbi explains, that no, we have to know that when ethics people can teach you ethics, but those same people can be very bad people. And therefore, if we don't know that it comes from Moshe Kibel Torah Mesinai, that Moses received the Torah from Sinai, that ultimately it all comes from God, to realize that God is what gave us these ethics, God forbid, it can never become absolute. It can never become true, because you can have the most advanced, like the Nazis made the name be erased, they can be the most advanced and brilliant country at their time, using the most advanced weaponry of genocide of a people, creating a Holocaust. And sadly, we're seeing this more and more today, especially when it comes to Israel. We've seen the terrible tragedies of the anti-Semitism, which is spewed by somewhat professors, academia, brilliant scholars. You have Professor Stephen Hawking, who is one of the brilliant physicists of our generation, and he's boycotting Israel, which is the most absurd thing in the world, because he's boycotting Israel. He's calling for a boycott of Israel when he was supposed to go to one of the Israeli seminars, and in fact, the machine that he's on is developed by a chip that was developed in Israel. And so we have the most brilliant scholars that seemingly are people that we can look up to, congressmen and congresswomen and scholars and academia and professors and people talking about boycotting Israel and what Israel's doing wrong, and it makes no sense. And the reality is, just because they say it, it doesn't make any sense. Sometimes life doesn't make sense. And therefore, when it comes to ethics of our fathers, specifically only in this tractate, where we would think that we can learn from other people who seemingly are more brilliant or more scholarly, we have to remember that God runs this world. And Moshe Kibel Torah Mesinai, you think ethics comes, we can learn from a brilliant scholar, that same brilliant scholar could, God forbid, say the worst possible things. Whereas if we know that ethics comes from Torah values, from Hashem, that's when it can be true and absolute. And so as we go into the Shabbos of Naso, the Shabbos of raising up, Naso is Rosh, B'nai Yisrael, raise up the heads of the B'nai Yisrael. It's time to raise up. It's time to be proud of who we are. We have the most ethical army in the world, and all of these scholars and people that are boycotting and telling Israel, you don't hear them boycotting about Syria and Nigeria and every other country in the world. Whereas Israel, all of a sudden, when it comes to Israel, it's become the woke thing in order to attack Israel for all of the horrible tragedies that they're doing. Whereas, in fact, Israel is the most ethical army in the world, making sure that to limiting the most possible way civilian casualties. And so as we go into the Shabbos, let's raise up our heads. Let's be proud of who we are. Let's wear our yarmulke outside, not to be afraid of what's going on in the world with anti-Semitism. Be proud of who we are as a Jew. And if we're proud of who we are as a Jew, we stand united together, not, God forbid, let them divide us and conquer. When we stand united together, then nobody will be able to take us on. And realize that everything we have come from Hashem. The land of Israel was given to us by God. We've been there for 3,000 years, more than 3,000 years, by Hashem. We have the chain of title from the beginning of time. And so, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Am Yisrael Chai. Stand up and be proud. And never let anyone try to put you down. Shabbat Shalom.